What's up, my comic comrades? Over the past few years, we have dropped several episodes on the most powerful weapons in comics, but recently, we have been having a debate around the studio about what are the most iconic weapons beyond just comics. I'm talking about iconic weapons from movies, TV, and video games, as well as comics, regardless of how powerful the weapon is. The only thing we're considering here is how popular and universally known the fictional weapon is. So we're looking for weapons that are synonymous with the characters who wield them and have essentially become a character of their own. With that in mind, we're going to give you the top 10 list we've narrowed it down to as of now. And before we kick things off with number 10, a quick reminder that the podcast returns next week on Monday, January 15th, so keep an eye out for that. And now, on with the show. Are you troubled by strange noises in the middle of the night? Do you experience feelings of dread in your basement or attic? Have you or any of your family ever seen a spook, specter, or ghost? If the answer is yes, then you need the weapon at number 10 on our list, the Ghostbusters Proton Pack. These positron colliders were introduced to the world in the original 1984 Ghostbusters film and are the primary and immediately recognizable weapons used by the Ghostbusters, Egon Spengler, Peter Venkman, Winston Zeddemore, and Ray Stantz, to lasso ghosts, or as they call them, negatively charged ectoplasmic entities. They were invented by Egon, and while Venkman initially referred to the packs as unlicensed nuclear accelerators, they're actually portable cyclotron systems that collide high-energy positrons to generate a proton beam powerful enough to dissipate the psychokinetic energy of the ghosts. They then fire the beam using the particle thrower called the Neutrino Wand. You know, it's technical. The important thing is that the Proton Pack is not a toy, and what we know about them has evolved and expanded quite a bit since they were first introduced. In fact, the Ghostbusters iconic weapon wasn't even given the name Proton Pack until Ghostbusters 2, when Egon used the term for the first time in the subway tunnel scene. Regardless, since they first started busting ghosts in New York in 1984, the Ghostbusters have become a pop culture staple that has spawned numerous films, cartoons, comics, and one of the most recognizable theme songs in film history. And it's impossible to even hear the name Ghostbusters without picturing them wearing their jumpsuits and proton packs. They're basically inseparable, which has also made it one of the most used cosplay weapons and coveted prop collectibles in geekdom. Altogether, the Proton Pack is easily among the most famous fictional weapons in all of pop culture, but remember, don't cross the streams. It would be bad. By the power of Grayskull, we have He-Man's Power Sword landing at number 9. This magical and epic weapon became part of the daily imagination of most young boys in the early 1980s, after Mattel launched the Masters of the Universe toy line, along with the He-Man and the Power Sword mini-comic that came with the original He-Man action figure. The Power Sword initially came in two pieces, half with the He-Man figure and the other half with the Skeletor figure, and the mini-comic provided the backstory, explaining that the sorceress, originally called the Goddess, had split the sword in two and separated the pieces to protect the Castle Grayskull and its source of magical power. The two pieces of the sword could then be combined and used as the key to lower the drawbridge on the Castle Grayskull playset, which was mind-blowing as a kid, especially after reading the awesome story and lore that came with the action figures. Needless to say, the Masters of the Universe toy line was a massive hit for Mattel, and it only got bigger when the Filmation animated series dropped the following year in 1983. The breakout success of this toy line cannot be overstated, and by the second season of the animated series, the merchandise had already made around $500 million in sales for Mattel, which immediately put He-Man, his Sword of Power, and the rest of his universe on the cultural influence level of Star Wars, Barbie, and the like. If you've never seen the Netflix series The Toys That Made Us, there's a great episode dedicated to the Masters of the Universe toy line, which you should definitely check out. Anyway, the Power Sword quickly became synonymous with He-Man for an entire generation of kids, and every little boy wanted one. So even though He-Man and the Masters of the Universe has not stayed in the cultural spotlight, the massive imprint it left on 80s kids especially still makes it one of the most iconic weapons ever. Next up in the 8th slot, we have the Sting and Anduril swords from The Lord of the Rings. Now, both of these weapons have been famous in literature since Tolkien released The Hobbit in 1937, and The Lord of the Rings between 1954 and 1955. But their fame went to an entirely different level after Peter Jackson released his live-action adaptations of the classic stories. For the movies, both of these iconic swords were brought to life in unbelievable detail by a true master swordsmith at Weta Workshop. And for the first time, we got to see Sting glow blue when orcs and goblins were near, and then see Anduril reforged and wielded by King Aragorn. These movies have expanded what was already a massive Tolkien fan base to a whole new generation, making these swords staples in pop culture lore. Look at it this way, if you think of Bilbo or Frodo, you picture them holding either the One Ring or the sword Sting. And if you think of Aragorn, you picture him chopping down orcs with the King's Sword. Tie it all together and you have two weapons that deserve their place on this list. At number 7, we have Thor's hammer Mjolnir. Thor's hammer was an icon of Norse mythology centuries before it ever hit the pages of Marvel Comics. But once Stan Lee, Larry Lieber, and Jack Kirby incorporated it into the Marvel Universe, they gave Mjolnir new life and expanded its mythology into the modern pop culture. Then 48 years later, during a post-credit scene in Iron Man 2, Phil Coulson discovers Mjolnir inside of an impact crater in the New Mexico desert, setting the stage for the first Thor movie in 2011. And just as the MCU has done for many characters, weapons, and artifacts from the Marvel Comics, it rocketed Thor's hammer into one of the most recognizable and loved weapons in all of fiction. In fact, I would say that Mjolnir is among the top 3 weapons or items of any kind in the Marvel Universe at this point. The fact that it's made from the heart of a dying star and infused with unique Asgardian enchantments, giving Mjolnir a level of sentience, also makes it one of the coolest and certainly one of the most compelling of any other weapon on this list, including the fact that not just anyone could use it or even pick it up, lest they be worthy to wield its incredible power, which essentially makes it the Norse version of the classic sword in the stone story. Anyway, Thor's hammer is just awesome all the way around and has claimed a prominent place in our pop culture ethos. When you talk about action heroes and adventure, Indiana Jones is going to come up pretty quickly. And the 2 items that quickly became indelible hallmarks of the character are his iconic fedora and the weapon at our number 6 spot, his equally legendary bullwhip. We first see Indy wield his bullwhip in the opening sequence of his very first movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, when he uses it to disarm a traitorous guide who tries to sneak up on him with a revolver. He actually uses his whip for several purposes in the opening temple scene, as he tries to recover a golden idol from an ancient South American temple. So George Lucas and Steven Spielberg established the bullwhip as Indy's weapon and tool of choice, and it's been synonymous with Indiana Jones as a character ever since, to the point that for many, you can't see anyone with a bullwhip without immediately thinking of Indiana Jones. We know that George Lucas is a fan of 1930s and 40s era pulp heroes, which has led many to speculate that Lucas may have drawn inspiration from Zorro to give Indy a bullwhip. Either way, several years after Raiders, we are given the fictional origin of Indy's fedora and why he wields his whip during the opening scene of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. The movie opens up with a flashback of a young Indiana on a Boy Scout trip when he stumbles on a group of treasure hunters who have found the lost cross of Coronado. He immediately recognizes the artifact and believes it should be in a museum, so he steals it and runs from the treasure hunters. They eventually chase him onto a circus train where young Indy falls into a lion's car and uses the tamer's whip to keep the big cat from turning him into lunch. His first attempt at swinging the whip also gives us the origin of the scar on Indy's chin, which was a fun add to the character story. Then in the most recent Indy film, Dial of Destiny, he continues to wield his iconic whip, but it's now the 1960s and everyone and their mama has a gun. So this leads to a scene where Indy tries to use his whip to hold off a room full of bad guys, but every one of them just pulls a gun on him at the same time. It's actually a fun callback to the scene in Raiders where an evil henchman tries to bring a sword to a gunfight. Anyway, the point here is that Indiana Jones's bullwhip is without question one of the coolest and most recognizable weapons in modern pop culture. Now, before we break into our top 5, let me introduce you to Exter, today's sponsor. They recently sent us 2 of their Parliament wallets, and it's pretty awesome. Check out this piece of pocket hotness wrapped in its environmentally certified premium leather. Exter's premium leather Parliament wallets holds up to 12 cards and bills, but is still super slim while giving me quick card access. The built-in aluminum card holder fans out your cards at the click of a button and protects them against RFID skimming, better known as wireless theft. Not to mention, it comes in 6 different colors. Another one of my favorite options is their tracker card. This add-on can be placed with your wallet so you could track it using a worldwide lost and found network should it get away from you. The tracker is also solar charged and voice activated using Siri, Alexa, or Google, and is the size of a credit card. Right now, Exter is running a killer New Year's sale until January 24th, so check them out before the deal is gone. At number 5 is a weapon that really doesn't need much introduction or explanation at this point. In fact, some of you will likely argue that it should be higher on our list because of its prominence in pop culture over the past decade, and that is the Infinity Gauntlet. The insanely powerful Infinity Gauntlet, which consolidates the power of the 6 Infinity Stones, or Infinity Gems as they're called in the comics, and channels it into one universe-commanding weapon, was first introduced in the 1990 Marvel Limited series, The Thanos Quest. This, of course, was the setup for the 1991 Infinity Gauntlet story that inspired the entire first decade of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This all-powerful gauntlet in the hands of Thanos, one of the greatest villains in cinematic history, became the center point for one of the biggest and longest-running pop culture phenomenons of all time. So between the popularity of the Infinity Gauntlet story in Marvel Comics and the impact it made once it was carried over to live action with the MCU, the Infinity Gauntlet has reached the upper deck of cultural awareness and popularity around the world, easily earning a top 5 spot. Now, speaking of cultural phenomenons, in 1997, a new children's book called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, written by little-known author J.K. Rowling, hit bookshelves in the United Kingdom, introducing young readers to the story about a boy wizard for the very first time. The book was an immediate hit, which led to it being published in the US a year later under the title Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, sparking a worldwide cultural obsession with the wizarding world. The mythology and lore that Rowling created runs deep, so of course there are many relics, artifacts, and weapons, but the one must-have weapon of any good wizard or witch is their wand. In fact, especially once the widely successful books became equally successful movies, they basically made the wand synonymous with being a wizard. You just have to get one to earn the title, like a rite of passage. And while there are countless wands, the most notable and central wand in the wizarding world is the weapon taking our number 4 spot, and that is the Elder Wand. Created by Death as one of the 3 magical objects called the Deathly Hallows, as told in the tale of the 3 brothers, the Elder Wand is the most powerful wand in existence, which is why Voldemort wanted to get his hands on it. Well, to everyone's surprise, it turned out that Albus Dumbledore was the master of the Elder Wand the whole time. At least during the Harry Potter timeline, because he actually won mastery of it by defeating Grindelwald in a duel in 1945. But the point is, much like the Infinity Gauntlet in the MCU's Infinity Saga, the Elder Wand became the central and most coveted weapon in the wizarding world, and whoever gained control of it believed they could claim ultimate power. As a result, the Elder Wand, specifically the design created for the Harry Potter films, is the first wand that comes to mind when you think about iconic wands in that world. And as the most powerful and iconic wand in a franchise that birthed a massive global fandom big enough to generate immersive theme park experiences, yearly conventions, countless fan websites, and much more, the 4th spot might not even be doing it justice. The only reason it's not higher on our list is because there are other popular wands from the Harry Potter stories as well, including Harry's original wand, which he actually goes back to at the end of the Deathly Hallows after winning the Elder Wand from Draco Malfoy and eventually deciding to return it to Dumbledore's grave. Unlike in the movie where he bizarrely and impulsively snaps it in half and throws it off a bridge. Anyway, we'll leave that for another day. On to number 3. At number 3 is a true American icon, and that is Captain America's shield. This star-spangled shield turned assault weapon has transcended into a legendary symbol at the level of Superman's crest and the bat signal. It's a symbol of hope for those on the side of justice and a symbol of fear for those seeking to go the other way. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true, especially after the MCU turned Cap into a household name for a whole new era. Cap's shield first appeared in Captain America Comics issue 1 in 1941, and it has evolved and gone through several transformations since. But regardless of its shape or design pattern, it has consistently remained a recognizable icon for the hero who wields it. In addition to protecting Captain Rogers and being used to keep Thor and Iron Man from killing each other, Cap's shield has become a central symbol for the Avengers and even the MCU in general. Then in 2018, the shield used by Chris Evans was added to the Smithsonian for preservation. That alone should tell you how iconic and symbolic the shield and weapon has become, and why we placed it in our top 3. Runner-up on our list is the Batarang. That's right, this iconic movie and comic weapon has had more comic, movie, animated, and TV appearances than any other character or weapon on this list, and it's not even close. Batman has an array of different Batarangs, but they all mainly serve as Batman's signature offensive weapon. It's essentially his version of the Ninja Star. In general, Batman is known for his gadgets, most of which are stored in his utility belt, but Batman's Batarang is easily the most iconic, only rivaled by the grapple gun. Over the years, we've seen countless iterations of his Batarangs across comics, movies, games, and so on, but the Batarang from the 1989 Batman movie, the Batarang used by Christian Bale Batman, and the Batarang from the Arkham games are probably the 3 most recognizable versions at this point. Regardless, the Batarang has become one of the longest lasting iconic weapons in pop culture and has to be toward the top of anyone's list. Taking the top spot is the lightsaber. Why? Because for the majority of you, when you read the title of this video, the first weapon that popped into your head was likely the lightsaber. Well, there's a good reason for that. Since George Lucas first introduced the world to this battle weapon of choice for both Jedi and Sith alike in Star Wars: A New Hope, it has become a prominent fixture of pop culture for people of all ages. In fact, Lucas did such an incredible job solidifying the lore and mythology around the lightsaber that we immediately associate different colored lightsabers with the light or dark side of the Force in the Star Wars universe, like blue and green for Jedi and red for Sith. I mean, even the sound of the lightsaber is famous. It's just become that universally adopted and ingrained in our collective awareness. It's kind of crazy, actually. Now, the first lightsaber ever shown on screen was Anakin Skywalker's blue lightsaber from his time as a Jedi Knight, when Obi-Wan Kenobi gave it to his son Luke. Later in A New Hope, we saw Darth Vader use his red lightsaber for the first time during his final duel against Obi-Wan. Since then, we have been introduced to countless iterations of the lightsaber, but there are a few clear standout fan favorites, including Darth Maul's double-bladed lightsaber, Luke Skywalker's green lightsaber, Darth Vader's red lightsaber, the spinning lightsabers of the Inquisitors, Ahsoka Tano's dual white lightsabers, Revan's dual red and purple lightsabers, and the now legendary Darksaber. And of course, the hero blade for the entire Star Wars Skywalker arc, the lightsaber of Anakin Skywalker. I could go on, but regardless of which lightsaber is your favorite, the important point here is that you have a favorite. We all do, which is why it's sitting at number 1 and undoubtedly the most iconic weapon in all of pop culture. Now that wraps up our top 10 list, but there are several insanely iconic fictional weapons that didn't make the cut and need honorable mentions. Starting with Iron Man's armor. This nearly made the list as there are serious arguments for it, but it just missed for several reasons. Most notably, the fact that it's a mech suit and it needs to be in a separate category. Next, we have the Star Trek phaser, which is another one that was hard to leave off our list because of its long-standing place in pop culture. Then there's the Master Sword from Zelda, Wolverine's claws, Hellboy's Good Samaritan gun, RoboCop's Auto 9, Conan the Barbarian's Atlantean sword, the Identity Disc from Tron, Freddy Krueger's bladed glove, the M41A pulse rifle from the Alien franchise, the noisy cricket from Men in Black, and James Bond's Walther PPK. All of those are massively iconic in their own right, so you can see why this was a tough list to assemble. Who knows? We might need to do a part 2 on this topic. But now it's your turn. Let us know what your thoughts are on this list and how yours would shake down in the comments. Other than that, we'll see you next time when we talk about all things comics.